Denzel Washington stood frozen, watching the young pregnant woman struggling to manage the checkout line at the grocery store. Her exhaustion was palpable, yet her determination shone through. What he did next would forever change her life. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more inspiring stories. It was an unassuming Tuesday evening in a small neighborhood grocery store in Brooklyn. Denzel had stopped by to pick up a few essentials, dressed in a simple black baseball cap pulled low and a worn leather jacket. He wasn't trying to attract attention, quite the opposite. After a long day on set, all he wanted was some peace and anonymity. The store was modestly busy, with fluorescent lights humming overhead and the occasional squeak of shopping cart wheels against the linoleum floor. Soft jazz played through crackling speakers, barely audible above the murmur of conversations and beeping scanners. Denzel stood in the produce section, absently examining an avocado when he first noticed her. The young woman couldn't have been more than 30, her pregnant belly prominent beneath her blue store uniform. Her name tag read Maya. Despite the visible strain on her face, she maintained a warm smile for each customer who approached her. Register. What caught his eye wasn't just her condition, but the way she carried herself, like someone bearing the weight of the world without complaint. Her movements were efficient but gentle, her voice soft but steady as she greeted customers. There was a quiet dignity in her demeanor that resonated with him. As Denzel selected a few more items, he continued to observe her from a distance. The line at her register grew longer as another cashier closed their lane. An elderly man with gnarled hands fumbled with his wallet at her counter, dropping several coins. Rather than showing impatience, Maya stepped around her station to help him gather the scattered change. "No rush, Mr. Gaines," she said, her voice carrying across the store. "We've got all the time in the world." Behind the elderly man, a woman, in business attire, checked her watch repeatedly, making no effort to hide her annoyance. Yet Maya remained unruffled, focusing entirely on helping Mr. Gaines count out his pennies and nickels. "I'm sorry about this," the old man said, his voice trembling slightly. "My fingers don't work like they used to." "Don't you apologize," Maya replied firmly. "Not ever. I've got you." When the total came up short by a few dollars, Maya discreetly reached into her own pocket and added the difference when the old man wasn't looking. The simple act of kindness, performed without hesitation or recognition, struck Denzel profoundly. As Mr. Gaines shuffled away with his groceries, Maya moved on to the businesswoman, absorbing her barely concealed frustration with the same steady patience. And so it continued, customer after customer, some pleasant, others less so, all receiving the same respectful attention. Denzel found himself lingering longer than necessary, pretending to compare labels on canned goods while watching Maya work. A manager approached her register, speaking in hushed but stern tones that nevertheless carried through the quiet store. "You need to move people through faster, Maya. Efficiency metrics are down for your lane." "I'm sorry, sir," she replied. "Mr. Gaines needed some extra help." "This isn't a charity," the manager replied. "Just stick to scanning and bagging. That's all you need to worry about." Maya nodded, her expression unchanging, but Denzel noticed her hand instinctively move to her belly, as if protecting her unborn child from the harshness of the world. When a young mother approached with a screaming toddler and a cart full of groceries, several customers sighed audibly. The woman looked exhausted, bouncing the child on her hip while trying to unload her items. Without being asked, Maya stepped around her counter again. "Here, let me help you with that," she said, taking over the unloading while the mother comforted her child. The manager, still nearby, shook his head in disapproval, but said nothing. As closing time approached, Maya's movements had slowed. Denzel noticed her subtly massaging her lower back between customers, wincing slightly, before putting on her smile again for the next person in line. During a brief lull, she closed her eyes for just a moment, drawing a deep breath before continuing. Making his decision, Denzel finally approached her register, placing his few items on the conveyor belt. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes and the slight tremble in her hands as she scanned his avocados, bread and milk. "Good evening," she said, the same warmth in her voice despite the obvious fatigue. "Did you find everything you were looking for?" "I did," Denzel replied, his voice deliberately casual. "But I'm wondering if you found what you were looking for." Maya looked up, confused. "I'm sorry?" "Forgive me," he said, allowing his disguise to drop slightly. "I couldn't help but notice you've been helping everyone else all evening. I'm wondering if anyone's helping you." Recognition flickered across her face as she realized who she was speaking to, but to her credit, she didn't make a scene. "I'm fine, sir, just doing my job." "You're doing more than your job," Denzel said quietly. "What you did for that elderly gentleman, for that mother, that wasn't in any job description." Maya's cheeks flushed. "It's nothing special, just common decency." "Common decency isn't that common anymore," Denzel replied, handing her his credit card. "And what you've got isn't just decency. It's something more." As she handed him his receipt, their eyes met. In that brief moment, Denzel saw beyond her exhaustion to something that reminded him of his own mother, a fierce determination to maintain dignity and kindness in a world that often rewarded neither. "Your total is $27.84, she said professionally, though her voice wavered slightly. Denzel took his grocery bag. "Thank you, Maya. You have a good night now." As he turned to leave, he noticed her glancing at the clock, then rubbing her back again. Through the store windows, he could see it had started to rain, droplets racing down the glass and blurring the streetlights outside. A thought occurred to him, and he found himself turning back. What Denzel Washington did next would not just change Maya's life, but would spark a chain of events that would touch an entire community. But in that moment, standing in the fluorescent glare of the grocery store, watching a pregnant woman summoning the strength to finish her shift with grace and kindness, he only knew one thing. He couldn't simply walk away. Denzel lingered in his car outside the grocery store, rain pattering rhythmically against the windshield. The digital clock on his dashboard read 10:07 p.m. According to the store hours, closing time was 10 p.m. He watched as employees trickled out into the rainy night, some huddled under umbrellas, others pulling hoods tight over their heads as they rushed to their vehicles. Maya emerged last, locking the door behind her. She stood under the store's awning for a moment, one hand on her pregnant belly, the other holding a small umbrella that had seen better days. She appeared to be waiting for something, perhaps a ride that hadn't arrived. After checking her phone and typing a quick message, she sighed visibly, squared her shoulders and stepped into the rain. Denzel watched as she made her way slowly toward the bus stop at the corner. Her gait was careful, deliberate, one hand protecting her belly instinctively. He started his car and pulled alongside her, rolling down the passenger window. "Excuse me," he called softly. Maya stopped, startled. Recognition flickered across her face when she saw who it was. "Can I offer you a ride?" Denzel asked, his voice warm but respectful. "This weather's no good for waiting on buses." Maya hesitated, uncertainty written across her features. "I don't want to trouble you, Mr. Washington." "No trouble," he assured. "Huh. And please call me Denzel." After a moment's deliberation, Maya nodded. "My regular bus is running late according to the app. If you're sure it's not out of your way, hop in," he said, reaching over to push open the passenger door. As Maya settled into the seat, closing her umbrella and placing it carefully on the floor, the interior light illuminated her features. Up close, the exhaustion etched into her face was even more apparent. "Where to?" Denzel asked, pulling away from the curb. "Flatbush," she replied. "Cortelyou Road. I can direct you once we're closer." They drove in comfortable silence for a few blocks, raindrops streaming down the windows, creating blurred constellations of streetlights. It was Denzel who finally spoke. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I noticed how you were with the customers tonight. Not everyone has that kind of patience." Maya looked down at her hands. "Life's hard enough without people being unkind to each other." "That elderly gentleman, Mr. Gaines, was it? You knew him by name." A small smile touched her lips. "He comes in every Tuesday and Friday. Lives alone since his wife passed. I think sometimes he comes just to have someone to talk to." "And you paid his shortage yourself," Denzel observed. Maya's head snapped up. "You saw that?" "I did," he nodded. "Just like I saw your manager reprimand you for taking too much time with him." She sighed. Mr. Peterson is under pressure from corporate. It's not personal. Maybe not, but it's not right either. Denzel paused, choosing his words carefully. How far along are you? 7 months, Maya replied, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. It's a girl. And you're still working. Double shifts? It wasn't a judgment, just a gentle inquiry. I don't have much choice, she admitted. Maternity leave at the store is just 6 weeks, unpaid. I need to save as much as I can before she arrives. The father isn't in the picture, Denzel asked, then immediately backtracked. I'm sorry. That's none of my business. It's okay, Maya said softly. Mike was a Marine. Her voice caught. He was killed in action 4 months ago. He never even knew about the baby. Denzel felt a tightness in his chest. I'm truly sorry to hear that. Thank you, she replied. It's been an adjustment. But we're managing, or we will. We? Me and her, Maya clarified, patting her belly. I'm naming her Michaela after her father. Denzel nodded, respect deepening in his expression. That's beautiful. Take a left at the next light, Maya instructed, subtly changing the subject. As they turned onto a tree-lined street with modest apartment buildings, Denzel noticed Maya glancing at the bus stop they passed, where several people stood huddled under the shelter. That's your usual stop? He asked. She nodded. It's about a 10-minute walk from there to my apartment. Not bad on good days. And on rainy days like today? Maya gave a small shrug. You do what you have to do. What did you do before the grocery store? Denzel asked, sensing there was more to her story. I was a combat medic, she said, her voice taking on a different quality, more confident, assured. That's how Mike and I met. I was honorably discharged when my first tour ended. I was studying nursing before. Her hand moved to her belly again. You had to put it on hold, Denzel finished for her. Just temporarily, Maya affirmed. The next building on the right, the brick one. Denzel pulled up in front of a well-maintained, but clearly aging apartment building. Here we are. Thank you for the ride, Maya said sincerely. It was very kind of you. As she reached for the door handle, Denzel spoke again. Maya, I hope you don't think this is forward, but I'm involved. With a foundation that supports veterans and their families, I'd like to talk to you about some opportunities that might be available. Maya's expression turned guarded. I appreciate that, but I don't need charity. It's not charity, Denzel corrected gently. It's support for people who've served. People who deserve it. Just a conversation, that's all I'm suggesting. After a moment's hesitation, Maya nodded. I suppose a conversation couldn't hurt. Denzel reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card with just his name and a phone number. This is my personal number. Call or text when you have some time. Maya accepted the card, looking at it thoughtfully. May I ask you something? Mr. Washington, Denzel. Of course. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Denzel's expression softened. My mother worked 2 jobs most of my life. I watched her struggle, watched people dismiss her, watched her maintain her dignity through it all. What I saw today in that store, you reminded me of her, and if someone had offered her a hand up, not a handout, but a hand up, maybe things would have been a little easier. Maya's eyes glistened in the dim light. Thank you for telling me that. As she got out of the car, Denzel noticed her glance back toward the corner. Following her gaze, he saw a young woman huddled at the bus stop, clutching a small child. Someone. You know, he asked. Tanya, Maya explained. She lives in my building, works nights cleaning offices. Her sitter must have cancelled again. Without hesitation, Maya changed direction, walking toward the bus stop instead of her building. Denzel watched as she approached the woman, spoke briefly, and then guided her and the child back toward his car. What happened next would be the first of many moments that showed Denzel that in helping Maya, he wasn't just changing one life, he was touching a community that had been quietly supporting each other all along, invisible to the world at large, but vital to those within it. The morning dawned clear after the previous night's rain, sunlight, glinting off puddles as Maya made her way to her car. She'd purchased the used Honda Civic 3 years ago, a practical choice with decent gas mileage that had served her well through countless commutes and grocery runs. Lately, though, the car had been showing its age. Strange noises from the engine, a persistent shimmy at highway speeds, and most concerning, the check engine light that had been illuminated for the past 2 weeks. Maya's hand rested protectively on her belly as she approached the vehicle. "Just hold together a little longer," she whispered to the car, "just until after Michaela comes." As she drew closer, something seemed different. The usual rust spot above the wheel well appeared to be gone. The windshield, which had sported a small crack since winter, was unblemished. Even the faded paint seemed somehow refreshed. Confusion furrowed her brow as she circled the vehicle. It was definitely her car, same license plate, same small Marine Corps emblem on the back window that Mike had placed there proudly. But it looked rejuvenated. When she unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, the interior smelled of cleaning products and something else. New fabric? The torn upholstery on the passenger seat had been repaired. The dashboard was dust-free and gleaming. When she turned the key, the engine purred to life instantly, without the usual protesting grind. Her eyes fell on a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. With trembling fingers, she retrieved it, her name written in an elegant, masculine hand on the front. Inside was a note on simple cream-colored stationery. "Maya, your car needed some attention. I know a great mechanic who owed me a favor. New tires, brake pads, oil change, engine tune-up, and a few other essentials. Consider it. Preventative maintenance for precious cargo, both you and Michaela. This isn't charity. This is one veteran's family helping another's. Mike would have wanted you both safe on the road at Denzel PS. There's a car seat in the trunk, the highest safety rating. Every child deserves the best start possible." Maya's vision blurred with tears. She opened the glove compartment to find a folder containing service receipts, warranty information for the new parts, and a schedule for recommended future maintenance. Opening the trunk, she found a top-of-the-line infant car seat still in its box, one she had researched online but dismissed as far beyond her budget. Her first instinct was pride, to call Denzel and tell him she couldn't accept such generosity. But then she thought of Michaela, of the safety this represented for her daughter. Sometimes accepting help wasn't about your own pride, but about what was best for those depending on you. She was still processing the gift when her phone chimed with a text from her neighbor Tanya. "Running late. Could you drop Jason at daycare?" "I'll owe you." 20 minutes later, Maya pulled up to Little Sprouts daycare with Tanya's 4-year-old son strapped safely in the back seat. As she helped him out of the car, a young mother struggled nearby, trying to manage a baby carrier, diaper bag, and toddler simultaneously. "Here, let me help," Maya offered instinctively, steadying the carrier while the woman corralled her escape-prone toddler. "Thank you," the woman breathed, visibly relieved. "I'm Jenny. We just moved here and my husband's deployed, so it's just me juggling these two for now." "I'm Maya," she replied, noticing the Army logo on the diaper bag. "Marine family?" Jenny nodded. "How did you know?" "My husband was a Marine," Maya said, gesturing to her car's emblem, "and I served as a combat medic." Jenny's posture relaxed immediately, the unique recognition that passes between military families. "It's so good to meet someone who gets it. This area's new to us and I haven't found my people yet, you know?" "I do know," Maya said, remembering her own isolation after Mike's death. "Look, I live nearby and my schedule at the grocery store is flexible. If you ever need an extra hand, or just someone who understands, here's my number." As she handed Jenny her contact information, Maya was struck by the parallel. Here she was, offering help to a stranger just hours after receiving Denzel's unexpected gift. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Later that morning, Maya pulled into the employee parking lot at the grocery store, her mind still processing the morning's events. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed Mr. Peterson, the manager, watching her arrival with disapproval. "You're cutting it close, Maya," he said, checking his watch pointedly. 2 minutes before your shift." "I'm sorry, sir. I had to help a military spouse get her children to daycare," Maya explained, knowing even as she said it that he wouldn't understand the unwritten code among military families. "Your personal errands need to happen on your own time," he replied dismissively. "And I need you on Register 4 today. Janice called in sick." Maya nodded, swallowing the response that rose to her lips. Jobs were too hard to come by to risk antagonizing her manager. As she tied her apron and prepared for her shift, she found herself wondering about Denzel Washington. What had motivated him to help her so generously? He'd mentioned his mother, but she sensed there was more to it. The morning passed in a blur of scanning items and pleasant customer interactions. Around noon, a familiar elderly face appeared in her line. "Mr. Gaines," she greeted warmly. "Tuesday already?" "Indeed it is, my dear," he replied, carefully placing his few items on the conveyor belt. "How are you and the little one today?" "We're doing well," Maya said, scanning his cereal and milk. "And I have some good news to share. My car got fixed. All the issues completely taken care of." "That's wonderful," Mr. Gaines beamed. "I know you've been worried about that old car." "It was unexpected," Maya admitted. "Someone I just met arranged it all. I'm still processing the kindness of it." Mr. Gaines nodded sagely. "You know, in my 82 years, I've learned that true kindness often comes from unexpected places. The trick is to accept it with grace and find ways to pass it on." "I was just thinking about that this morning," Maya said, helping him bag his groceries. "I met a new military spouse struggling with her kids, and it felt so natural to offer help." "That's how it works," Mr. Gaines smiled. "Kindness creates more kindness. It's the best kind of ripple effect." As Mr. Gaines shuffled away, Maya noticed a familiar figure entering the store. Denzel, dressed simply in jeans and a button-down shirt, attracting curious glances from other shoppers despite his attempt at discretion. Their eyes met across the store, and Maya mouthed a silent, "Thank you." Denzel nodded, his expression warm but unassuming, as if to say that what he'd done was nothing extraordinary. What Maya couldn't know was that Denzel's gift wasn't just about fixing her car. It was the first step in a plan that had formed in his mind the moment he witnessed her quiet dignity and generosity. A plan that would soon transform not just Maya's life, but the lives of an entire community that had been surviving in the shadows, helping one another without recognition or reward. 3 days after the car repair, Maya found herself sitting across from Denzel at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of Brooklyn. The establishment was deliberately low-key, warm brick walls, soft jazz playing in the background, and enough privacy that Denzel could speak freely without constant interruptions. "I'm glad you called," Denzel said, stirring his black coffee. His presence was commanding even in this casual setting, though he carried himself with a humility that put Maya at ease. "I needed to thank you properly," Maya replied, both hands wrapped around her herbal tea. "What you did with my car, it wasn't just a repair. It was peace of mind." Denzel nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. "Sometimes the most valuable gift isn't the thing itself, but what it represents." "Still," Maya continued, "I want to understand why. People don't just do what you did, especially for strangers." A shadow passed over Denzel's face, his eyes reflecting something distant. "My mother raised me alone in Mount Vernon. She worked as a beautician during the day and cleaned offices at night. I watched her struggle, not just with money, but with a system that never seemed designed to help people like her succeed." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "There was this one winter when I was about 11. Our heat got cut off because she couldn't make the payment. Too proud to ask for help, she kept it from everyone. We wore coats indoors for 2 weeks. Maya listened intently, recognizing in his story echoes of her own struggles. One day, her regular customer, a woman who had no way of knowing our situation, left. An envelope with exactly the amount needed to restore our heat. Said it was a holiday bonus for my mother's excellent service all year." Denzel's expression softened at the memory. "My mother cried that night after I went to bed. I wasn't supposed to see, but I did. She must have been relieved," Maya said quietly. "It was more than relief," Denzel replied. "It was the first time I understood that accepting help doesn't diminish you. Sometimes it gives you the strength to keep going." He met Maya's eyes directly. "That lesson shaped me. I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I'd be that person for someone else." Maya nodded slowly. "That makes sense. But there are countless people struggling. Why me?" "Because when I saw you helping that elderly man, covering his shortage, being kind despite your own circumstances, I saw someone who gives even when their own cup isn't full." Denzel leaned forward slightly. People like that are rare, Maya. And they deserve support. His sincerity was disarming. Maya found herself sharing more than she'd intended. After Mike died, I felt invisible, like the world moved on while I was frozen in that moment. The only thing that helped was focusing on others, Mr. Gaines, Tanya, and her son, the customers who needed a kind word. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Denzel said, his voice warm with admiration. Most people retreat into themselves when they're hurting. You reached outward. A comfortable silence settled between them as the cafe bustled around them. Eventually, Denzel reached into his jacket and produced a folder. "This is what I wanted to discuss with you," he said, sliding it across the table. "It's not charity. It's an opportunity." Maya opened the folder to find information about the Denzel Washington Family Foundation, specifically a program supporting veterans' families pursuing healthcare careers. "You mentioned you were studying nursing before life intervened," Denzel explained. "The foundation provides scholarships that cover tuition, books, and, most importantly, childcare." Maya's fingers traced over the brochure. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Denzel assured her. "Look it over. The next cohort starts 3 months after your due date. Perfect timing for you and Michaela." "How would this work?" Maya asked, professional interest overcoming her initial hesitation. "Practically speaking, full scholarship, stipend for living, expenses and on-site childcare during classes," Denzel explained. "In return, participants commit to working in underserved communities for 3 years after graduation. Many choose VA hospitals or clinics in military communities." Maya's medical training kicked in as she calculated timelines and logistics. "And I would start when Michaela is 3 months old?" "The program is designed for parents," Denzel nodded. "Flexible schedule, distance learning options when needed, and a cohort of other parents in similar situations, many of them military families." For the first time in months, Maya felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Hope. Not just the determined pushing forward that had carried her since Mike's death, but genuine hope for a future that could be more than mere survival. "This isn't just about you, Maya," Denzel continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Think about how many veterans you could help with your combined experience, military service and nursing. You understand their struggles in a way most healthcare providers never could." Maya thought of the nights in Afghanistan, treating wounded soldiers while trying to convey through her eyes that they would be okay, even when words failed. She thought of Mike, who'd always believed in her abilities more than she did herself. "Mike, who's to say that everything happens for a reason?" she said quietly. "I stopped believing that after he died, but maybe—" Her voice trailed off. "Maybe your path led you here for a purpose," Denzel finished for her. Maya wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. "I'll think about it. Really think about it." "That's all I ask," Denzel said, his smile reaching his eyes. "And regardless of what you decide about the program, I'd like to stay connected. There's something special about what you're doing, even if you don't see it yet." As they prepared to leave, Denzel asked a question that caught Maya off guard. "That young mother you mentioned, Jenny with the deployed husband, would she benefit from connecting with other military spouses?" Maya blinked in surprise. "Absolutely. She's completely isolated here." "The foundation also runs support groups," Denzel explained, "not just for scholarship recipients, but for the wider military family community. Here's information about the Brooklyn chapter." He handed her another brochure. "They meet Thursdays at 7, childcare provided." As Maya accepted the brochure, understanding dawned. "This isn't just about me, is it? You're building something bigger." Denzel's expression was thoughtful. "When I was a boy, my mother used to say that a problem shared is a problem halved, but a blessing shared is a blessing doubled. I believe that." Walking back to her car, Maya felt a shift inside her, subtle but significant. For the first time, since receiving the news of Mike's death, she felt connected to something larger than her grief. This wasn't just about accepting help. It was about becoming part of a network of support that extended beyond her own needs. What she couldn't yet see was how this connection with Denzel Washington would eventually expand into something that would transform not just her life and her daughters, but the lives of countless others who, like her, had been silently carrying their burdens alone. The ultrasound technician's face gave away nothing as she moved the wand across Maya's swollen belly. Maya stared at the ceiling, trying to read the woman's expression from her peripheral vision. Something felt off. The appointment was taking longer than usual, and the tech had called in the doctor mid-examination without explanation. "Is everything okay?" Maya finally asked, her voice betraying her anxiety. "Dr. Patel will discuss the results with you," the technician replied professionally, wiping the gel from Maya's abdomen. 15 minutes later, Maya sat across from Dr. Patel, a kind-faced woman with streaks of grey in her dark hair. The doctor's normally warm demeanor seemed tempered with concern. "Maya, your blood pressure is significantly elevated," Dr. Patel began. "Combined with the protein we're seeing in your urine and the swelling in your ankles, I'm concerned about preeclampsia." The medical term sent a chill through Maya. As a former combat medic, she knew exactly what this diagnosis could mean. "I'm prescribing bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy," Dr. Patel continued. "Limited activity, regular home blood pressure monitoring, and twice-weekly check-ins here at the clinic." Maya's mind raced. "Bed rest, but I can't. I have work, I have bills." Dr. Patel's expression softened. "I understand the practical challenges, but we need to prioritize your health and your baby's. Preeclampsia can escalate quickly, leading to serious complications for both of you." Maya nodded numbly, accepting the written instructions and prescription. Outside the clinic, she sat in her car, the car Denzel had repaired, and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of tears before straightening her shoulders and starting the engine. Her first stop was the grocery store, not as a customer but as an employee who needed to have a difficult conversation. Mr. Peterson's reaction was exactly as she expected. "Bed rest until your due date? That's nearly 8 weeks away," he said, frowning at her doctor's note. "I can hold your position for the standard disability period, but I can't guarantee anything beyond that." "I understand," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I appreciate whatever accommodation you can provide." As she cleaned out her locker, several co-workers expressed their concern and support. Even Mr. Gaines, who happened to be shopping, promised to check on her. Yet the reality remained stark. No work meant no income, and the small emergency fund she'd built would barely cover a month of expenses. Back at her apartment, Maya methodically calculated her finances. Her military benefits provided health coverage, but not income replacement. Her savings would cover rent and utilities through the end of the month, but beyond that, the numbers simply didn't add up. She thought about calling Denzel. His foundation's scholarship program wouldn't begin until after Michaela's birth, but perhaps there were other resources he could connect her to. Her finger hovered over his number, but pride held her back. He had already done so much. Asking for more felt like crossing a line from accepting help to becoming dependent. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Tanya, holding a casserole dish. "Heard you weren't feeling well," Tanya said, bustling into the apartment. "Thought you could use some dinner." Maya smiled gratefully. "How did you know?" "Jenny from the daycare mentioned your doctor called you in for extra tests. Military spouse grapevine works faster than the internet." Tanya set the dish on the counter and turned to face Maya. "What's the verdict?" "Preeclampsia. Bed rest until delivery." Maya tried to keep her voice matter-of-fact, but it wavered slightly. Tanya's face fell. "Oh, honey, that's rough. What about work?" "Medical leave, but unpaid." Maya gestured to the spreadsheets on her table. "I'm trying to figure out the financial side now." "Let me help," Tanya offered, sitting down at the table. "Before Jason, I was an accounting assistant. Budgets are my thing." As they worked, Maya's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart sank as she read the headline, "Denzel Washington spotted with pregnant store clerk. New romance or charity case?" The article was accompanied by a grainy photo of their meeting at the cafe, Maya's pregnant profile clearly visible. The text speculated wildly about their relationship, painting either a salacious or pitiful picture. depending on the paragraph. "What the hell?" Tanya gasped, reading over Maya's shoulder. "How did they even find out about you two?" Maya felt physically ill. Someone at the cafe must have recognized him and tipped off the tabloids. She scrolled through the article, each word worse than the last. "They're calling me an opportunistic store clerk in one paragraph and a charity project in the next." Her phone rang. Denzel. Maya hesitated before answering. "I just saw the article," he said immediately, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Maya, I'm so sorry. My team is contacting the publication to demand a retraction." "It's not your fault," Maya said, though the damage was already spreading as other outlets picked up the story. "I should have been more careful about where we met," Denzel replied. "This kind of invasion of privacy is unfortunately part of my world, but you shouldn't have to deal with it." The conversation was brief, both of them aware that extended contact would only fuel the rumors. After hanging up, Maya felt a strange hollowness. The media attention wasn't just embarrassing, it threatened the Foundation's scholarship opportunity. Who would want a program associated with a tabloid scandal? Her phone continued to buzz with messages from co-workers, and even Mr. Gaines all inquiring about the article. Maya turned it off, unable to face the barrage of questions. "You need to rest," Tanya insisted, taking charge. "I'll stay with you tonight. We'll figure this out tomorrow." But sleep eluded Maya. Between her health concerns, financial worries, and now this public humiliation, the challenges seemed insurmountable. For the first time since Mike's death, she allowed herself to acknowledge how alone she truly felt. Morning brought a new complication. A letter had been slipped under her door overnight, a notice of rent increase effective the following month. The timing couldn't have been worse. Tanya found Maya at the kitchen table, the letter in one hand, her other resting protectively on her belly. "I can't do this," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was strong enough, but I'm not." "That's the preeclampsia talking," Tanya said firmly, putting on a pot of decaffeinated coffee. "Your blood pressure is making everything seem worse than it is." "No, it's reality," Maya countered. "I'm about to have a baby. I have no income. My rent is increasing. And now I'm being dragged through the tabloids. Mike would be so disappointed in how I've handled everything." "Mike would be proud of you," Tanya corrected. "And you're not alone in this. You have me, Jenny, Mr. Gaines, and whether you want to admit it or not, you have Denzel Washington in your corner." Maya shook her head. "I'm calling Denzel today to decline the scholarship. I can't be associated with his foundation right now. It would only hurt his work." "That's not your decision to make," Tanya argued. "Let him determine what risks he's willing to take." Maya stood unsteadily, one hand braced against the table. "I need to handle this my way. I've relied on others too much already." As she made her way back to bed, Maya didn't realize that her greatest challenge wasn't financial insecurity, or health complications, or even public scrutiny. It was the same obstacle that had held her back since childhood, the belief that accepting help somehow diminished her worth as a person. What she couldn't yet see was that the community forming around her, from Tanya to Mr. Gaines to Denzel himself, was about to demonstrate a truth that would fundamentally change her perspective on strength, vulnerability, and the power of human connection. The onset of Maya's symptoms was sudden and severe. 2 days after receiving her diagnosis, she woke disoriented, her vision blurred at the edges, her head pounding with such intensity that even the dim morning light felt like needles in her eyes. When she tried to stand, the room tilted violently. Tanya, who had taken to checking on Maya every morning before her shift, found her struggling to reach her phone. One look at Maya's swollen face, and the urgency became clear. "Hospital." "Now," Tanya said, already dialing 911. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but news travels even faster in close communities. By the time Maya was being wheeled into Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, her phone was filled with messages from co-workers, neighbors, and even regular customers from the grocery store who had somehow heard about her condition. In the emergency room, the medical team worked with efficient precision, diagnosing severe preeclampsia, verging on eclampsia. Maya's blood pressure had reached dangerous levels, putting both her and the baby at risk. The doctor's words floated around her in disconnected phrases. Emergency C-section, stabilize, neonatal intensive care. "My baby's too small," Maya managed to say, her medical training breaking through the fog of her symptoms. "She's only at 32 weeks. We have an excellent NICU," the doctor assured her, "but right now we need to focus on keeping you both alive." As she was prepped for surgery, Maya felt a wave of terror unlike anything she'd experienced in combat. In Afghanistan, she'd had training, equipment, a team. Here she was utterly powerless, her body betraying her, her child's life hanging in the balance. "I need someone," she whispered to the nurse, adjusting her IV. "Anyone." The nurse squeezed her hand. "I'll check the waiting room." Minutes later, as Maya drifted under anesthesia, she was vaguely aware of someone entering the pre-op area. A familiar voice, deep and steady, promised, "I'm here, Maya. You're not alone." Mr. Gaines. Somehow the elderly man she'd helped count pennies had made his way to her bedside in her darkest hour. Michaela Washington Jones was born at 10:17 a.m., weighing 4 pounds 3 ounces, tiny but fierce, her lungs surprisingly strong, as she announced her arrival with a robust cry that belied her size. Maya, still unconscious, didn't hear her daughter's first sounds or see her being whisked away to the NICU, but others did. The waiting room of the maternity ward had filled with an unlikely assembly. Tanya sat beside Mr. Gaines, who despite his age had insisted on staying. Jenny from daycare had arrived with her 2 children, setting up an impromptu play area in the corner. 3 of Maya's co-workers from the grocery store huddled together, checking their phones for updates. And in a quiet corner, wearing a baseball cap pulled low but unmistakable nonetheless, sat Denzel Washington. The nurse who emerged to provide an update was momentarily startled by the size of the gathering. "Are you all family?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes," Tanya answered without hesitation. "All of us." The nurse nodded, understanding the broader truth in Tanya's claim. "Mother and baby are stable. Maya is in recovery, and Michaela is in the NICU. She's doing remarkably well for her gestational age, but she'll need to stay here for a while." A collective sigh of relief passed through the group. Mr. Gaines wiped tears from his weathered cheeks, while Jenny hugged her children close. "When can we see them?" Tanya asked. "Maya should be awake in a few hours. As for the baby, immediate family can visit the NICU once she's settled." Tanya exchanged glances with the others. "We'll wait." As the day progressed, the waiting room transformed. Someone ordered pizza. Jenny's husband, home on a surprise 48-hour leave, arrived with diapers and newborn clothes. Maya's store manager, Mr. Peterson, appeared briefly to deliver a card signed by the entire staff, his usual stern demeanor softened by concern. And then there was Denzel, who moved quietly among them, not as a celebrity, but as one more person bound to Maya through circumstances and choice. He spoke with Mr. Gaines at length, listening intently as the elderly man shared stories of his late wife's nursing career. He helped Jenny's toddler build a tower of waiting room magazines. He coordinated with the hospital social worker to ensure Maya's insurance would cover the emergency delivery and NICU stay. Late afternoon brought the first opportunity to visit. Tanya went in first, returning with tears and a smile. "She's awake, a little groggy, but asking for all of you." They went, in small groups, mindful of hospital rules and Maya's need for rest. Mr. Gaines emerged from his visit visibly moved. "She thanked me for being there," he said incredulously, "as if I could have been anywhere else." When it was Denzel's turn, he hesitated. "Maybe I shouldn't," he said to Tanya. "After that tabloid article, she asked for you specifically," Tanya replied, 3 times. Maya's hospital room was dim and quiet, the only sounds the steady beep of monitors and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. She looked small against the white sheets, her face still puffy from the preeclampsia, an IV line running into her arm. But her eyes were clear as they met Denzel's. "You came," she said simply. "Of course I did." He took the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Maya admitted. "But they say Michaela is doing better than expected. Have you seen her?" Denzel shook his head. Only immediate family can visit the NICU. A complicated expression crossed Maya's face. They let Mr. Gaines in. He told them he was my grandfather. She swallowed hard. I never knew my real grandfather. He's the closest thing I have. He loves you, Denzel said. They all do. That waiting room is full of people who dropped everything the moment they heard you were in trouble. Tears slipped down Maya's cheeks. I don't understand why. I haven't done anything special for any of them. Haven't you? Denzel leaned forward. How you covered Mr. Gaines's grocery shortfall. You drive Tanya's son to daycare. You helped Jenny navigate a new city while her husband's deployed. You treat every customer with dignity, regardless of how they treat you. He reached for her hand. Careful of the IV line. Maya, communities aren't built on grand gestures. They're built on small kindnesses repeated day after day until they form connections strong enough to hold people together through the worst times. Maya's monitors recorded a slight increase in her heart rate. I've been so focused on standing on my own that I never saw what was happening around me. Independence is overrated, Denzel said with a gentle smile. Interdependence, that's where the real strength is. Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse bringing a tablet with a video feed from the NICU. For the first time, Maya saw her daughter, impossibly small, wires monitoring her vital functions, but undeniably present and fighting. She's beautiful, Denzel said softly. She's so tiny, Maya whispered, her finger tracing her daughter's outline on the screen. But not alone, Denzel reminded her. Neither of you is alone. As if to underscore his point, the nurse mentioned casually, there's a group collecting donations for the baby in the waiting room. Someone's organizing a meal train for when you go home, and an elderly gentleman has appointed himself your daughter's honorary great-grandfather. He's reading her The Velveteen Rabbit through the NICU window. After the nurse left, Maya turned to Denzel, her expression transformed by a realization. This is what you were trying to show me, isn't it? That helping others isn't just about what we give. It's about what we create together. Denzel nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. You've been building this community all along, Maya. Person by person, kindness by kindness. Today they're just showing you what you've built. As he left her to rest, Denzel knew that Maya's journey had reached a turning point. The challenges ahead remained significant. Michaela's development, Maya's recovery, their financial future, but the foundation beneath them had solidified into something that could bear the weight of those challenges and more. What he couldn't yet know was how this small community, forming around a grocery store clerk and her premature daughter, would eventually expand into something that would touch thousands of lives, beginning with his own. 3 weeks after Michaela's birth, the NICU had become a second home to Maya. She settled into the routine of hospital life, the beeping monitors, the hushed conversations, the careful hand-washing rituals before she could touch her daughter. Michaela was growing stronger each day, her tiny body gradually filling out, her grip tightening around Maya's finger when she reached into the incubator. Maya had been discharged after 5 days, but she spent every possible moment at the hospital. The doctors were optimistic. Barring complications, Michaela might come home within another 2 weeks. The thought filled Maya with equal parts joy and terror. She's a fighter, the NICU nurse commented one afternoon, as Maya held Michaela against her chest for their daily skin-to-skin contact. Just like her mama. Maya smiled but said nothing. Fighter. The word carried different weight for her than for the nurse. That evening, as Maya prepared to leave the hospital, she found Denzel waiting in the family lounge. Their interaction had settled into a comfortable rhythm. He visited regularly, always bringing something practical. Groceries for her apartment, gas cards for her car, books on premature infant care. Today he carried a thick manila envelope. How's our girl doing? He asked, his voice warm with genuine interest. Gaining weight right on schedule, Maya replied, the pride evident in her voice. The doctor says her lungs are developing well. That's excellent news. Denzel gestured to the empty seat beside him. Do you have a minute? There's something I'd like to discuss. Maya sat, suddenly alert to the change in his tone. Is everything okay? Yes, he assured her. But I've been thinking about your future, yours and Michaela's. The foundation scholarship is still available. But given recent events, I wonder if we need to think bigger. Bigger? Denzel slid the envelope toward her. The Foundation is launching a new initiative focused on veteran healthcare. We need someone with both military medical experience and civilian perspective to help shape the program. Someone who understands the gaps in the system firsthand. Maya opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside. A formal job offer. For a position as Program Development Consultant with the Denzel Washington Family Foundation. This is, she began, uncertain how to respond. It's not charity, Denzel said, anticipating her concern. It's recognition of expertise we genuinely need. The salary is standard for the position, and it includes benefits, flexible hours, and the option to work remotely while Michaela is young. Maya set the papers down carefully. Why me? You could hire anyone with my background, someone with more experience, more education. Denzel's expression grew serious. Maya, I've been watching you navigate impossible circumstances with grace and integrity. You have a unique perspective that can't be taught or bought. But there's something else, something I've sensed but couldn't quite place until recently. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your medical knowledge exceeds what I'd expect from a combat medic. The way you discuss Michaela's care with the doctors, your understanding of complex conditions, it suggests more extensive training. Maya's heart raced as she realized where this conversation was heading, the secret she'd kept buried since Mike's death hung between them, unspoken but increasingly evident. You're right, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't just a combat medic. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for a truth she'd shared with no one in her new life. I completed medical school at Johns Hopkins. I was a licensed physician doing my residency in emergency medicine when I met Mike. We fell in love, got married, and then 9/11 happened. Denzel listened without interruption as Maya's story unfolded. We both enlisted, Mike in the Marines, me in the Army Medical Corps. I could have served as a physician, but I chose to deploy as a combat medic because that's where I felt I could make the most difference. I served 2 tours before coming home to continue my residency. Her voice grew strained as she approached the part of her story that still haunted her. During Mike's last deployment, I was working at Walter Reed. I was there when they brought in the wounded from his unit. I wasn't assigned to his case, military protocol, but I was in the hospital that day. Tears filled her eyes. He died during surgery. Catastrophic internal injuries from an IED. I was 3 floors away treating a soldier with a broken leg when my husband took his last breath. Denzel reached for her hand, offering silent support as she continued. After that, I couldn't face medicine anymore. Every patient reminded me of Mike, of my failure to save him, even though logically I know there was nothing I could have done. I left my residency, gave up my license, moved to Brooklyn to start fresh. When I discovered I was pregnant, it felt like a miracle, but also a burden I wasn't sure I could carry alone. Maya wiped her eyes with her free hand. The grocery store. Job was supposed to be temporary while I figured things out. Then it became permanent when I couldn't imagine returning to medicine. How could I be responsible for others' lives when I couldn't even save the person who mattered most to me? The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Denzel had experienced his own losses, his own moments of questioning his path. Thank you for trusting me with your truth, he said finally. It only confirms what I already believed. You're exactly the person we need for this position. Maya shook her head. I'm not the same person I was before. I'm not sure I can be that person again. I'm not asking you to be who you were, Denzel replied. I'm asking you to be who you are now, someone who understands both sides of the system, who's experienced the highest levels of medical training, and the reality of being vulnerable and in need. He gestured toward the NICU. Every day you advocate for Michaela with medical knowledge that ensures she gets the best care possible. Imagine doing that for thousands of veterans and their families who don't have your training, who don't know what questions to ask or what resources exist. Maya looked down at the job offer again, seeing it with new eyes. Not charity, not pity. An opportunity to use everything she'd learned, both as a physician and as a patient's family member, to create something meaningful. I haven't practiced medicine in nearly 2 years, she said, voicing her practical concern. My license is inactive. The position doesn't require an active medical license, Denzel explained, though the foundation would support you in reinstating it if that became something you wanted. Maya's mind raced with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider since Mike's death. I would need some time, she said slowly, to get Michaela home, establish a routine. Of course, Denzel agreed. The position will be there when you're ready. 3 months, 6 months, whatever you need. As they left the hospital together, walking through the quiet evening streets, Maya felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of her secret, but the heavier burden of believing her past was something to escape rather than incorporate into her future. Why didn't you tell anyone? Denzel asked gently. About being a doctor? Maya considered the question carefully. At first it was too painful. Then it became easier to be nobody than to explain why I'd walked away from everything I'd worked for it, and maybe part of me believed I didn't deserve that identity anymore. Denzel nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes we need to step away from who we were to discover who we can become. As they reached her car, Maya turned to him with newfound clarity. Thank you. Not just for the opportunity, but for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. What Maya couldn't know was that her revelation had cemented Denzel's conviction that their paths had crossed for a reason far greater than chance. The program they would build together would eventually become a model for veteran healthcare nationwide, transforming not only Maya's life, but the lives of thousands of families like hers. But first, there was a tiny fighter in the NICU waiting to come home, and a mother rediscovering her own strength one truth at a time. 6 weeks after Michaela came home from the NICU, Maya's apartment had transformed. A bassinet occupied the corner of the living room, surrounded by the essential paraphernalia of newborn care. Books on infant development lined the shelves that once held medical textbooks Maya had kept, but never opened. The refrigerator door displayed a carefully crafted feeding and medication schedule, with Michaela's weekly weight gains tracked in precise handwriting. But the most profound transformation wasn't in the apartment. It was in Maya herself. Dr. Jones, your 3 o'clock is ready. Maya looked up from her laptop, momentarily startled by the title she hadn't used in nearly 2 years. She was sitting in a small office at the Brooklyn Veterans Outreach Center, where she'd begun working part-time as the foundation program took shape. Thank you, Alicia, she replied, closing the document she'd been reviewing, a draft proposal for a mobile health clinic serving veteran families. And please, just Maya is fine. Alicia, the center's receptionist, and a Navy veteran herself, smiled knowingly. Old habits. The families prefer addressing you as doctor, gives them confidence in your guidance. Maya nodded, understanding the psychological component of the title while still adjusting to reclaiming it. 3 months after, revealing her background to Denzel, she had decided to reactivate her medical license. Not to practice clinical medicine yet, but to properly advise the program they were developing together. She glanced at the baby monitor, showing Michaela sleeping peacefully in the center's family room, where Tanya had taken a part-time position as childcare coordinator. Another piece of Denzel's growing vision, creating employment opportunities within the community they were serving. Maya's 3 o'clock was a Marine veteran named Carlos and his wife, Elena. They entered hesitantly, Carlos walking with the deliberate gait of someone managing chronic pain. Thank you for seeing us, Dr. Jones, Elena began, her accent betraying her nervousness. Your assistant said you might be able to help us understand Carlos's treatment options. Over the next hour, Maya did what she'd been trained to do years, but with a perspective she couldn't have imagined then. She translated complex medical information into practical guidance, explained how to navigate the VA healthcare system, and helped them prepare questions for Carlos's next specialist appointment. You actually understand, Carlos said near the end of their session, his voice thick with emotion. The doctors talk at me, not to me. You talk to us. I've been on both sides, Maya replied simply. My husband was a Marine. I know what it's like to sit where you're sitting. As they left, Elena hugged Maya impulsively. You've given us hope, she whispered. Not just information, hope. After they departed, Maya sat quietly processing the interaction. This was the 4th family she'd counseled today, each with different circumstances but similar needs: understanding, advocacy, and practical support, navigating systems designed for efficiency rather than compassion. Her phone chimed with a text from Denzel. "Meeting with potential donors tomorrow. Your presentation ready?" Maya glanced at her laptop, where slides detailing the program's initial outcomes waited for final review. Tomorrow would be her first major presentation as the face of the initiative, explaining to foundation donors how their investment was already changing lives. "Ready," she texted back, surprised to realize it was true. The woman who had hidden her medical background while scanning groceries was now preparing to advocate publicly for improved healthcare access for veterans. The transformation felt both sudden and inevitable. Later that evening, as Maya fed Michaela, in the peaceful quiet of their apartment, a knock at the door heralded Mr. Gaines's weekly visit. The elderly man had appointed himself Michaela's honorary grandfather, bringing small gifts and stories about his late wife's nursing career. "There's my girls," he beamed as Maya let him in. "How's our little miracle today?" "Growing stronger every day," Maya replied, handing Michaela to him with practiced ease. "Just like her mother." Mr. Gaines settled into what had become his chair, cradling Michaela with the confidence of someone who had raised children of his own. "I brought something special today," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "Found it while cleaning out some old boxes." Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman in a 1960s-era nurse's uniform, standing proudly outside a hospital. "My Margaret," Mr. Gaines explained. "This was her first day as head nurse at Kings County Hospital. She would have been about your age then." Maya studied the photograph, noting the determination in Margaret Gaines's eyes, the same expression she now saw in the mirror. "She would have loved what you're doing," Mr. Gaines continued. "Using your knowledge to help others navigate the system. That was her specialty too." "I wish I could have met her," Maya said sincerely. "Oh, she's here," Mr. Gaines replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than sentimental. "In the work you're doing, in the way you care for Michaela. Ideas and compassion. Don't die with us. They live on in those we touch." The next morning, Maya stood before a small but influential group of donors in the Foundation's conference room. Denzel had introduced her with a warmth and respect that still caught her off guard, describing her as the heart and mind behind our most promising new initiative. "6 months ago," Maya began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I was a grocery store cashier hiding from my past and struggling to imagine a future. Today I stand before you as both a physician and a veteran's widow, uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between what our healthcare systems offer and what military families actually need." As she moved through her presentation, showing early data from the program's pilot phase, Maya felt a sureness that had been absent for years. This wasn't the confidence of her medical school days, that brash certainty that knowledge alone could solve problems. This was deeper, tempered by loss and strengthened by community. "We've served 37 families in our first quarter," she explained, providing not just medical advocacy but holistic support. When a veteran struggles with healthcare access, it affects the entire family. Our approach addresses the whole unit. The donors asked thoughtful questions, clearly engaged. Maya handled each with a poise that reflected her dual perspective. Clinical knowledge filtered through lived experience. When one donor asked about scalability, Denzel stepped in. "That's where we'd like to direct your investment," he explained. "Dr. Jones has designed a training program to expand our advocate network. We're recruiting from both the medical community and veteran families themselves, creating jobs while extending our reach." After the presentation, as the donors mingled over coffee, Maya found herself momentarily alone. She stepped to the window, looking out at Brooklyn's skyline, marveling at how her world had expanded beyond survival mode. 6 months ago, her focus had been getting through each day. Now she was helping shape a program with national potential. Denzel joined her, respecting her reflective mood with comfortable silence before speaking. "You were extraordinary today," he said finally. "Authentic, knowledgeable, passionate. They couldn't look away." "It didn't feel like a performance," Maya replied. For the first time in years, I feel like all the pieces of myself are working together instead of at cross purposes. The doctor, the veteran's wife, the new mother, they're all part of the same person now." Denzel nodded, understanding the significance of this integration. That's the true transformation, not just changing circumstances, but becoming whole again. As they rejoined the group, Maya knew the external changes in her life. The job, the foundation work, even Michaela's birth, were visible manifestations of a deeper shift. She had stepped out of the shadows of grief and shame into a life of purpose built on everything she had experienced, both beautiful and painful. What remained to be seen was how far this transformation would reach, beyond herself, beyond the foundation, into a community hungry for the very connection and purpose she had found. 1 year after Michaela's premature arrival, Maya stood in the doorway of her daughter's nursery watching her sleep. The room had been transformed from a sparse storage space into a warm sanctuary. Its walls painted a soft yellow with framed photographs capturing Michaela's journey from tiny NICU baby to robust 1-year-old. Maya checked her watch, 5:30 a.m. She'd need to wake Michaela soon for their busy day, but for now she savored the peaceful moment. Her daughter slept with her arms flung wide, as if embracing the world, so different from those first precarious weeks when she'd been connected to monitors and feeding tubes. "Look at you now," Maya whispered, her chest tight with love and gratitude. Today marked not only Michaela's first birthday, but also the official launch of the Veterans Family Care Initiative, the program Maya had helped develop over the past year. What had begun as a small pilot at the Brooklyn Veterans Outreach Center had grown into a comprehensive support system, connecting military families with medical advocates across the city. Maya's phone vibrated with a text from Denzel. "Car will pick you up at 7. Don't forget Michaela's special outfit. Today is her day too." She smiled at his attention to detail. Denzel had insisted that Michaela be part of the opening ceremony. "She's the inspiration for all of this," he'd said, overriding Maya's initial concerns about having her daughter in the spotlight. At precisely 7 a.m., Maya emerged from her apartment building carrying Michaela, who wore a tiny navy blue dress with a matching headband. Tanya waited beside a sleek black SUV, her son Jason holding a small gift bag. "Happy birthday, Princess," Tanya cooed, tickling Michaela's chin as Maya secured her into the car seat. Jason solemnly presented his gift, a handmade card decorated with glitter and stickers. The drive to the newly renovated center took them through familiar Brooklyn neighborhoods. Maya pointed out landmarks to Michaela, who babbled excitedly in response. "That's where Mommy used to work," she said as they passed the grocery store. "And there's Mr. Gaines's apartment building." The center itself had been transformed. Once a neglected community building, it now featured a modern facade with the foundation's logo prominently displayed. A crowd had already gathered outside. Despite the early hour, veterans and their families, medical professionals, community leaders, and media representatives. Denzel waited at the entrance, dressed in a sharp suit, but with the same warm, unassuming demeanor that had characterized their first meeting. "There's our guest of honor," he said, bending to greet Michaela, who reached for him with familiar affection. "And her mother, without whom none of this would exist," he added, straightening to meet Maya's eyes. "Ready?" Maya nodded, adjusting. Michaela on her hip, "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside, the center hummed with anticipation. The main lobby had been arranged for the ceremony, with rows of chairs facing a small podium. Photos lined the walls. Not glossy promotional images, but real moments capturing the program's impact. A veteran receiving assistance, navigating complex medical paperwork. A spouse meeting with an advocate. Children playing in the new family. Support area. Maya recognized many faces in the crowd. Carlos and Elena, now volunteer peer counselors. Jenny, whose husband had returned from deployment and joined the center's outreach team. Mr. Gaines seated in the front row looking prouder than if it were his own granddaughter's graduation. At precisely 9 a.m., the ceremony began. Denzel took the podium first, his commanding presence silencing the room without effort. "1 year ago," he began, I witnessed something in a grocery store that changed my perspective on true service. I saw a pregnant woman, exhausted but determined, extend kindness to those around her despite her own struggles. That woman was Dr. Maya Jones, a physician who had stepped away from medicine after losing her husband in service to our country. Denzel gestured toward Maya, who stood at the side of the stage, Michaela quiet in her arms. What struck me wasn't just her kindness, but the ripple effect it created. The elderly man she helped became her daughter's honorary grandfather. The young mother she assisted became part of her support network. The connection she formed without realizing it became the foundation for her survival when crisis struck. He continued, his voice resonating with conviction. That's the principle behind the Veterans Family Care Initiative. Medical care isn't just about procedures and medications. It's about connection, advocacy, and recognizing that when one family member serves, the entire family bears that burden and deserves our support. Maya listened, still sometimes amazed at how her everyday actions had been perceived as exceptional. In her mind, she'd simply been doing what anyone would do, helping where she could, even when her own resources were limited. Today, Denzel concluded, I'm honored to introduce the woman whose vision shaped this program, who transformed her own pain into purpose, and who reminds us daily that true healing happens in community. Please welcome Dr. Maya Jones, our program director, and her daughter Michaela, whose dramatic arrival into this world catalyzed everything we celebrate today. The applause was warm and genuine as Maya approached the podium, Michaela observing the crowd with curious eyes. Maya had prepared remarks, but standing before these people, many of whom had been part of her journey from struggling single mother to program director, she set aside her notes. A year ago, I stood alone in a hospital room, terrified of what the future held for my premature daughter and me, she began, her voice steady. Or at least I thought I was alone. What I discovered in the hours, days, and months that followed was that I had been building a community without realizing it. Through small kindnesses, through showing up for others even when I was barely managing myself. Maya shifted Michaela to her other hip, the movement natural and unconscious. This center exists because Denzel Washington saw something in that grocery store that I couldn't see myself. But it thrives because every person in this room understands a fundamental truth, that healing isn't a solitary journey. It happens in the spaces between us, in the hand extended to help with groceries, in the ride offered on a rainy night, in the presence of an elderly gentleman at a hospital bedside when there's no biological family to be found. As she continued, speaking, outlining the center's services and future vision, Maya felt Michaela begin to fidget. Without missing a beat, Mr. Gaines rose from his seat and approached the stage, arms outstretched. Maya handed her daughter to him with practiced ease, continuing her address as Mr. Gaines returned to his seat, with Michaela contentedly settled on his lap. The moment wasn't planned, but it perfectly illustrated everything Maya was describing, the natural support system that had developed around her family, the interdependence that had replaced her fierce but lonely independence. After the formal ceremony, as attendees toured the facility, Maya found herself momentarily alone with Denzel. In the center's new telemedicine suite, designed to connect families with specialists, regardless of location. Did you ever imagine this, she asked, gesturing around them. When you saw me counting pennies with Mr. Gaines, Denzel's expression was thoughtful. Not exactly this, but I recognized something rare, someone who gave from emptiness rather than abundance. That's the kind of person who can transform systems, because they see both the gaps and the possibilities. Before Maya could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion at the center's entrance. A group of unexpected visitors had arrived, 5 military families who had driven overnight from Virginia after hearing about the program from a mutual friend. We want to know how to start something like this back home, their spokesperson explained. Our community needs this too. As Maya stepped forward to welcome them, she realized that Michaela's birth had indeed marked a new beginning, not just for her daughter, but for a movement that was growing beyond anything she could have imagined 1 year ago in that grocery store checkout line. The transformation had come full circle, from one person's quiet kindness to a ripple effect touching lives far beyond. Brooklyn. The autumn sun filtered through the trees lining the walkway to the newly constructed Veterans Family Support Center in Manhattan. 6 years had passed since Michaela's dramatic entrance into the world, and the small seed planted in Brooklyn had grown into something far greater than Maya or Denzel had initially imagined. Today marked the opening of the 5th center in their national network, but this one held special significance. Unlike the previous locations, this flagship facility had been designed from the ground up, with every detail reflecting the program's philosophy, from the wheelchair-accessible meditation garden to the child-friendly medical consultation rooms, where families could remain together during difficult conversations. Maya stood at the podium, her posture confident yet approachable, so different from the hesitant woman who had addressed their first audience 6 years ago. At 41, she carried herself with the earned authority of someone whose vision had been validated through measurable impact. Her hair, now styled in a professional bob, framed a face that had exchanged exhaustion for purpose. "Today isn't just about opening a building," she began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "It's about acknowledging a fundamental truth we've proven over the past 6 years, that medical care without community is only half the cure." The audience represented the full spectrum of their work: veterans and their families, medical professionals, community organizers, government officials, and foundation supporters. Among them sat the original Brooklyn community that had formed around Maya and Michaela during those critical early days. Mr. Gaines, now 88 but still sharp-minded, occupied a place of honor in the front row. Beside him sat Tanya, who had risen to become the national training director for the center's peer support program. Jenny and her husband, now parents to 3 children, had relocated to Fort Bragg, where they coordinated the center's military base outreach. "When I was a medical student," Maya continued, "I was taught to treat the disease. As a combat medic, I learned to treat the whole person under the most extreme circumstances, but it wasn't until I found myself on the other side, vulnerable, alone and in need, that I truly understood what comprehensive care means." Maya gestured to a large display behind her, where photos chronicled the program's evolution. "In 6 years, we've served over 10,000 families across 15 states. We've trained 400 medical advocates, many of whom are veterans or military spouses themselves. We've reduced emergency room visits among our participants by 62% through preventative care and early intervention." The statistics were impressive, but Maya knew the true measure of their success couldn't be captured in numbers alone. "But our greatest achievement isn't visible in these metrics. It's in the renewed sense of dignity our families experience when they're seen not as cases to manage, but as whole people deserving of comprehensive support." As Maya concluded her remarks, she smiled at Michaela, now a spirited kindergartner, sitting between Denzel and Mr. Gaines. "I'd like to invite my daughter Michaela to join me for the ribbon cutting. After all, she's the real founder of this program. Her arrival changed everything." Michaela approached the stage with confidence, her navy blue dress matching her mother's suit, her father's dog tags worn proudly around her neck, a connection to the man she'd never met but whose legacy lived on through her. Maya lifted her daughter to stand on a small platform beside her. "Ready to make it official?" Maya asked. Michaela nodded solemnly, taking the ceremonial scissors in both hands. Together, they cut the ribbons spanning the center's entrance, officially, opening the facility as applause erupted from the crowd. The reception that followed filled the center's spacious atrium. As guests explored the facility, Maya found herself momentarily alone with Denzel near the Wall of Honor, a display recognizing key contributors to the program's success. "I've been thinking about that first day in the grocery store," Denzel said, his voice reflective. "If someone had told me then what would grow from that moment, I'm not sure I would have believed them." Maya smiled. "I certainly wouldn't have. I was just trying to survive each day." "That's what makes this so remarkable," Denzel replied. "We didn't set out to create a national model. We simply responded to what was needed, one family at a time." Their conversation was interrupted by a reporter requesting an interview with Denzel about the Foundation's role in the program. As always, he redirected the attention. "The real story is Dr. Jones and her team," he insisted. They've created something revolutionary by simply recognizing what was already there, the power of community to heal what medicine alone cannot. Later, as the event wound down, Maya found herself surrounded by the original Brooklyn support network that had sustained her through Michaela's birth and early months. They gathered in the center's family room, away from the formal proceedings, sharing memories and updates. "Remember when we all crowded into that tiny hospital waiting room?" Tanya laughed. "The nurse couldn't believe we were all there for you." Family comes in many forms, Mr. Gaines said, his hand resting gently on Michaela's shoulder. "Some we're born into, some we create along the way." Maya looked around the circle, at Mr. Gaines, who had appointed himself Michaela's grandfather, at Tanya, whose childcare assistance had made Maya's return to medicine possible, at Jenny and her husband, whose military family had expanded Maya's understanding of service. "You know what still amazes me?" Maya said softly. "None of you had any obligation to help us. You all had your own struggles, your own burdens." "That's exactly why we did help," Jenny replied. "Because we understood. When my husband was deployed and I was alone in a new city with 2 small children, your simple kindness made all the difference. How could I not pass that forward?" As the conversation continued, Michaela tugged at Maya's hand. "Mom, can I show Mr. Gaines my special project now?" Maya nodded, and Michaela disappeared briefly, returning with a carefully crafted school assignment, a family tree unlike any traditional version. Rather than limiting the branches to biological connections, Michaela had created what she called her family forest, with multiple trees representing different types of connection. "See, this is our blood family," she explained to Mr. Gaines, pointing to a small tree with few branches. "And this is our heart family," she continued, indicating a much larger tree with his name prominently displayed on a sturdy branch. Mr. Gaines blinked rapidly behind his glasses. "You did this yourself?" "My teacher said family trees only show who you're related to," Michaela explained. "But I told her that's not how real families work." Maya watched as her daughter explained her creation to the gathered group, each person finding their name somewhere in the forest of connection. The assignment revealed how thoroughly Michaela had internalized the program's core philosophy. That healing and thriving happen within communities of care that transcend traditional boundaries. As the evening concluded, Maya stood at the center's entrance, watching as her original support network departed together, Mr. Gaines carefully, assisted by Tanya's teenage son, who had once been the small boy Maya drove to daycare. Denzel joined her, observing the scene with appreciation. "The true legacy isn't the buildings or even the program itself," Maya said thoughtfully. "It's the ripple effect, how each person touched by this work goes on to create their own circles of support." Denzel nodded. "That's always how real change happens, not through grand gestures by a few, but through small acts of kindness multiplied across many." As Maya gathered her belongings and took Michaela's hand to leave, she realized that the journey that had begun with a simple interaction at a grocery store checkout had come full circle. The pregnant woman struggling to survive had transformed into a leader, transforming systems, but the essential truth remained the same. Human connection was the most powerful medicine of all. The legacy they had built together would continue to grow, not through Maya's or Denzel's efforts alone, but through the thousands of individuals who had experienced the healing power of community and were now creating it for others, a self-sustaining cycle of connection that would outlast any building or program. And at the heart of it all was a 6-year-old girl who had entered the world too soon, but had arrived at exactly the right time to inspire a movement that was changing what it meant to truly care for those who had served and the families who served alongside them.